Hi, everyone, and welcome to Mapping the Dance World podcast. This week's guest is an amazing dancer and teacher. She started dancing at the age of 4 and went on to train at the Australian Ballet School. From there, at the age of 18, she accepted a contract with the Royal New Zealand Ballet. During her stay there, she performed pieces from Balanchine and Forsyth, was Dorothy in Wizard of Oz, and she was also a title role in Christopher Hampson's Cinderella. She now teaches ballet to the next generation. I think she's amazing, and I know you all love her. Say hello to Bronte Kelly.
Hello.
So
Thank you for having me.
let's start from the very beginning. You started dancing when you were 4. Was there a reason that happened, or like what kind of got you started?
That's an interesting question, actually. I was a very shy girl, very, very shy. I barely spoke to anyone, which people who know me now will find quite funny because I'm not like that anymore. And when I was very, very shy, I had a school teacher who said to my mother, "Why don't you put her into ballet class?" And at first, Mum thought that was quite odd because, of course, you don't talk in ballet. And she sort of thought, well, how is that going to help her talk and communicate? And the teacher said, because maybe it will give her a way of communicating in a different way. And it absolutely did. So that she put me into ballet class and I found my voice. Yeah.
So if I remember correctly, you're from Queensland originally, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Correct,
absolutely.
And then you went to Australian Ballet at what age?
14.
So how, in those 10 years, do you decide to move to Melbourne to pursue a career in ballet?
That's another very good question. So I went to ballet class to sort of find my voice and come out of myself, learn to express myself in a different way, which, as I discovered, was through movement. And I just fell in love with it. I have always had, as I said, apart from being shy as a student, as a young girl, I was also quite misunderstood at school. I had dyslexia, which at the time no one really knew about. And so I was quite misunderstood at school for not fitting in. I didn't understand why I didn't understand things or could read things the same way as others did. And I quite often felt on the outer and was frustrated why I couldn't fit in. But when I was dancing, when I was in the studio, I felt like I understood it in a way that no one else did. And I felt like I could express myself and show people my point of view. And I don't know how, and I still don't really understand that, but I just felt like when I was dancing that rather than me trying to fit into someone else's world, I was showing someone my world and showing them how I saw things. And that understanding and belonging and not feeling like I had to try and fit in, but actually being the one that did fit in and make sense of things and feel right and feel myself and confident, that I just fell in love with that feeling and that sense of, as I said, rather than trying to fit into someone else's world, showing them mine. And that kind of just dragged me deeper and deeper into the industry until I wanted to keep going further.
So you're at the Australian Ballet for 4 years. And if I remember correctly, you even did a tour with the company, or with the junior company, whatever they call in the Australian Ballet. What was that like, going to Australian Ballet School? What kind of, I don't know, what was that experience like?
I personally loved the Australian Ballet School. I could not recommend that school highly enough. It gave me knowing wanting to do more in the industry, guiding me through those stages and challenging me constantly challenging me in my idea of what it was to be a dancer, challenging me in my ability, challenging me in every which way a person could be challenged, really. They supported you along the way, so you were gaining confidence as you were gaining these questions. So I really, through all these teachers and the different influences from the English teachers that taught you the placement and the understanding, to the Russian teachers who taught you that fire and that passion, from the Chinese teachers, Madam Tang, who challenged us in every which way and taught us how to jump. So I think that the Australian Ballet School was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because it really, they understood me and they understood what I needed to continue on, and I sort of felt that guidance throughout the way. And then of course in my second last year, in my 7th year, level 7 as it's called, I was asked to go on Dance's company tour, and then level 8 I went again. So I actually got to do 2 tours. And Dance's company tour, you tour around Australia and you have artists from the Australian Ballet Company do it with you, so you're sort of you're paid as well, so it's like a paid experience sort of tour, and it's exactly like a company, of course with a lot more guidance. And they really make you, because they give you a feeling of what it is to be in the industry, and do you actually enjoy it? Because it's one thing to do class in the studio every day, but it's a whole nother thing to be on the road and performing every night, and having to adapt to different theatres and living out of a suitcase and feeding yourself and all these sorts of things that are what the industry is. It, as much as being helps, it doesn't prepare you for. So having that under my belt, 2 tours of that with that guidance and learning a lot along the way, when I got to company my first year, it was a much smoother transition than I found most people had in their first year, because I'd already had that on tour experience. So I'm really forever grateful for that. Yeah.
Something I want to kind of get like later on into is a little bit of that kind of tour experience. What is it really like to be in a company? But kind of continuing your story on, you're 18 and you get offered a contract with the Royal New Zealand Ballet. What goes through your head? Like, why? What made you go yes?
Well, again, that's another quite interesting question. I think when you're 18, I certainly was extremely naive, and I think that sort of had helped in a lot of ways, because I sort of didn't, you just go with it. You're young and you have no fear. And I was graduating in the Australian Ballet School, and the director of the Royal New Zealand Ballet, who at the time was Gary Harris, very famous, amazing choreographer in his own right, and he came over to watch us in classwork. And one of my teachers said, I think you'd be great for this company, you should put your resume forward. So I put my resume forward at the start of class with a whole bunch of other kids. And he watched us in class, and he was like nothing I'd ever experienced. He was so not used to teaching students, and so company, that he started, he's very English, and he'd start singing. So he'd start halfway through class, he'd just start busting out into song. And we're all at the Australian Ballet School, and very serious, this is an audition, my first ever. And he starts singing, and I'm thinking, what is going on? Like, what is this guy doing? And then we did fondue center, and he just, to put it in more polite words for the sake of the internet, he said, that was terrible, in other words, let's try that again. And I couldn't believe it. We were all looking around each other going, what is going on? Like, where's it final year of the Australian Ballet School? What is going on? And I found him hilarious. And I think I even laughed. I thought, what is going on in this class? Like, he was just nothing I'd ever experienced. I think he quite liked that I just sort of went with it. He would throw these curveballs at us. And I think he enjoyed that I would just sort of go with it. So at the end of class, we're rehearsing for our end of year production, which I was fortunate enough to do the leading role in Snow Queen. I'm preparing for that. And I just thought, okay, he obviously doesn't have anything, because it just sort of finished and fizzled out. I thought, okay, right. So I'm starting to put my point shoes on. And he comes up to me and said, Bronte, have you ever been to New Zealand? I'm like, no, my family didn't have a lot of money. I'd never been overseas anywhere. So he said, have you ever been to New Zealand? I said, no, but I'd like to go. I just thought he was making a polite conversation. He goes, yeah, I'm offering you a contract. And I was like, oh my good, okay, sorry. And I said, can I hug you? And he laughed. He went, yes. And all my teachers are outside like, what is she doing? I just hugged him. I was so happy, because it's one thing to go through the Australian Ballet School. It's one thing to want it so badly, but there's no given. It doesn't matter what school you go to. It doesn't matter how good you are. There's no given that you're going to get that job. And it doesn't matter where or who with or what, but the fact that someone was going to pay me to do a job that I loved, are you kidding me? So I just jumped at 18, and first time I'd ever been overseas was to fly and move to New Zealand. So yeah.
God, that's just brilliant. The image of a young you just like jump up and giving this guy a hug.
It was amazing.
So you rock up in New Zealand. What was, because I recently, as you may have seen, I already talked to a student who's now just moved to Germany. What was the shift to New Zealand like? Kind of, what did you find was different about the culture, different about the kind of the climate of it all?
That's a very good question. I think it's important to recognize that when you join a national company, so for instance, the Royal New Zealand Ballet or the Australian Ballet Company, or when you join a national company, National Ballet of Canada, that really represents that country, it's important to not try and stick to your own culture. It's important to really go with an open mind and try and embrace theirs, because when you then travel with that company, you're representing that country. So when I went on to travel with the Royal New Zealand Ballet, I went on to represent New Zealand. And when I first got there, I think I expected it to be pretty much the same. Being so close in proximity, I really expected it to be not much different. And I was quite shocked at how big of a culture difference there was. And one of the main ones was their appreciation for the Maori culture, and how it wasn't just a piece of history that they were taught about and educated about and ticked that box. It was a part of who they were, and it was a part of who the company was. And it was important that we understood that. And I was fortunate enough in my time there to have many cultural experiences where we actually learnt some of the Maori language. We did formal greetings when Ethan Stiefel joined. So we didn't do an English greeting. We did a formal New Zealand greeting. And I just was quite overwhelmed with how much that culture was embraced and how much I embraced it when I was there and felt a part of it, because it feels like you're being part of something bigger. And I think you'll have that in any country. And that's why I say, I feel like you don't have to be afraid of different. I think dive in, because if you're going to be part of the company, which is about culture and art, you need to respect the culture and art that you are amongst. Yeah, it was amazing.
Wow, that's really interesting. I guess it's a little bit different from kind of how Australia has the Indigenous culture. I like the difference. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it was really eye-opening, and I think it's something that I will always take away with me. And I hope to educate my own children not only about the Maori culture, but more about the Indigenous culture than I was perhaps brought up with, because I can see how not only respecting it, but being knowledgeable about it and learning from it can actually help the society move forward. That it can help you work together, and there's so much we can have to learn from the original native owners of those countries. And I think it's more than respect. It's one thing to respect them, it's another thing to actually research and to get involved with. So yeah.
So what was your first year in the company really like? Because I remember when I talked to, this doesn't come out yet, but I talked to Victor. And Victor's experience was very much like he kind of just was like working heaps, doing everything he could, and he kind of just did everything he could. Was it similar for you, or how was it? How was it?
Yeah, I definitely hit the ground running, the best way I could describe it, because in the Royal New Zealand Ballet at the time that I joined, there was no ranking. So that means that there was no hierarchy. There was an underlying one, of course, from how long you'd been there, and from quarter ballet to principal. So that meant that anyone was up for any role. And so when you're working in that kind of environment, I loved it. I thrived off it because there was no comfort. You know, anytime a cast slips went up, that could be you. So when I first joined the company, the first season I did was Smalls Tour, which is where the company actually splits into two. And one tour was in North Island, one tour was in South Island. They go to all these very small towns. And so that's a great opportunity there for younger dancers to have more of a seniority role because there's only half the company. So my first season with that company, I actually got given a solo, which was really a sink or swim type moment because Greg Horseman was choreographing Birdie variations. And Greg Horseman was someone I'd always idolized as well from the Australian Ballet. So to not only work with him, but to have him give me a solo. And when you're on small tour, it's not an easy tour. You're performing at these very, very small theatres, sometimes town halls in these communities. And basically what a small tour is all about, make it work. And they only do one every, I think it was 2 years then, but I think now it's even less. I think now it's every 4 years. It is a very grueling tour. And on my first season with the company, we were preparing to go on tour. And unfortunately, Christchurch had a massive earthquake. It was around the time, and many people lost their lives. Many people lost their homes. It was quite horrific. It was very horrific, and a lot of the dancers had family members that had lived in Christchurch, and the theatre there, which was a historic theatre, was destroyed. So they put together a small group of us, and I was fortunate enough to be one of them. And they said, we're going to put on free performances for Christchurch. And it was nerve-wracking even going. I mean, they were still having these shakes every day. So it was nerve-wracking even going, but it was part of our job as a national company to go and show support. And before that, I don't think at 18, I really got what it was about. I was so caught up with being a graduate of the Australian Ballet School and wanting to do these big roles in the 32 Fuetes and the big theatres in Europe and the lights and the fame. I wanted all those things that most dancers wanted. And we go to this town hall in the middle of Christchurch where people had actually been sleeping because they'd lost their houses. And there was hundreds of people packed in. There was people standing, there were children crying, there was seats, but they didn't have enough seats, so people were just standing. And we did this performance with no sets, no anything. We just did this performance. At the end of the performance, we had a question and answer. And one of the ladies put her hand up and said, I just want to thank you for taking us away from all of this for 1 hour. For 1 hour, I didn't think about my house that's been destroyed. For 1 hour, I didn't think about the job I'd lost. I didn't think about the friend who'd lost a cousin, who lost a family member. I didn't think about that. For 1 hour, you transported us somewhere beautiful. And little 18-year-old me just went, oh, that's what this is about. That's what I do. It's not about the 32 Fuetes and the theatres. And luckily, fortunately enough, later in my career, I got those things. I did get the 32 Fuetes. I did get the theatres in Rome and in London and that, but they're not the memories I hold dear. The memories I hold dear are sitting in that little community centre, reaching out to those people who were going through all this mess and thanking us for bringing them some joy. So my first year was quite a wake-up call that I needed as an artist, and I think it really set me up for the rest of my career. Yeah.
So was that structure of kind of almost like free range parts, I'm not even sure what to refer to, like a free for all, was that consistent throughout your whole time at the company?
Yes, it was. As I said, there was an underlying hierarchy, but there was no official one. And I was fortunate enough to then grab a hold of quite a few soloist roles and then quite a few leading roles. And as I got to doing more consistent leading roles, I sort of only ended up doing those roles. So it sort of was it's a hierarchy that's sort of undertoned. But you had to keep on top and you had to keep proving yourself, which did make it a good work environment because no one sort of sat back And because it's a small company, you either worked your way there or you were out, because they weren't going to pay for people to sit around. So it was quite an intense company to be a part of, but one I wouldn't take back for anything, because as I said, I don't think I would have got the roles or the opportunities as young as I had I been in a larger company where I had to wait my time. So you just sort of hit the ground running.
So how long were you actually in the company?
I think it turned out to be 6.5, 7 years. Yeah. Yes.
And
so it's interesting.
You go.
No, right? I was going to say it's interesting because when you think about that time frame, I have a lot of people say that's not a very long career. But when you're in it, and as I said, when you're 18 and you're in your first soloist role, by 19 I was doing my first leading role. I toured America, Hong Kong, the UK, Europe. You just sort of and working with these international choreographers we had coming in, everything was fast paced, nothing was weighted. So I feel like in a bigger company with more people, 6 years you might only just get to choreography. So you're like, oh, I'm just starting. Whereas the kind of environment I was in, as I said, you just hit the ground running, you just went for it. I felt like I'd experienced so much in that time that by the end of that 6 years, it was like, okay, I want more. I want something different. I want a new challenge. So it wasn't, I just think it's important to point that out, because it's so interesting how people sort of just sum it up in, oh, it's that many years, that's not long. And you're like, well, it was quite an intense, I don't think I had the rest in that time, so yeah.
Because the half the reason I actually asked, and I bring it up, is because I was looking at kind of, when I was doing my research, I was looking at the roles you'd done, and there was a lot there, and there was a lot of varying stuff. And I found it really interesting that the New Zealand company itself, and something I wanted to talk to you about, you guys did Balanchine works, you did Forsyth works, you did the classics, you did modern stuff. Like, what was that like, just doing so many different styles and so many different like choreographers, and what was that all entailing?
I think it was really interesting as an artist, because you never got comfortable. So you couldn't sort of sit there and say, I'm this sort of dancer. I hear it all the time. When students are talking to me, they say, oh, I'm a more classic dancer, so I'm going to do audition for this company. Or I'm more contemporary dancer, I'm going to audition for this company. I'm like, no. They do it all. So in my time there, I had 3 different directors. So I joined with Gary Harris, and then I had Mart Skoog, who was an intern director, who used to be the director of English National Ballet Company. And then I had Ethan Stiefel, who was, of course, American Ballet principal. And then I had Francesco, who's an Italian, of course. So we had all these different influences as well. So I think that had something to do with it. So obviously at first it was very classic and English style, because Gary was English. And then with Ethan, he brought in Balanchine, but he also brought in new choreographers and up and coming, like Liam Scarlett, who was just incredible. Work with Johan Kohlberg, who of course is incredible in his own right, came to work with us quite a few times actually. And of course his wife, Gillian Murphy, Ethan's wife, Gillian. So I think having all these different country influences and these different choreographers and directors, they brought in so much, and you just had to learn to adapt if you wanted to keep your job, because an English director, American director, and an Italian director don't want the same dancer. Let me tell you that much. They do not want the same dancer. They want very different things. And so for me to keep my job, I had to learn to adapt. I mean, I couldn't move as fast as Ethan. I remember when he first joined, the classes he would teach, I couldn't keep up. I couldn't move fast enough. So we had a really long Christmas break that year. And I remember going home to Queensland and just hiring some little local studio and being like, right, I've got to learn to move faster if I want to keep my job. No more of this controlled, more English style. I've got to get a move on, because I'm not keeping up, and he can see that. I knew he could see that. So I just, every day in the studio, I started off slow with like 6 tondus, and then I would turn the speed up and I'd go faster. And then I'd turn the speed up and I'd go faster. And just every day I would push myself getting as fast as I possibly could with trying to keep the technique, because Ethan had flawless technique. So it was such a challenge. And I remember coming back and I couldn't wait to show him. And I couldn't wait. And then he came back and he started teaching classes and I could keep up. And so I would start to get noticed. I would start to get things and I would start to get roles. And balancing is one of those things that I absolutely loathed rehearsing, because it just felt like walking backwards while trying to do this, because it's just so fast and uncomfortable. But it's one of the best things you can perform, which I don't really understand. But so when you learn to not be nervous by change and not be afraid of having to change your style, I'm this old, I can't change, I'm trained this way. No, you can always adapt. You're a blank canvas. If you've got good technique, you're a blank canvas and you can move with it. And you just have to, if you want to stay in the industry, if you want to stay relevant, and if you want to adapt from Forsyth, where you have to be strong and fierce and flexible, to balancing, where you have to be fast and energetic and stamina of a racehorse, to the classics where you have to be pure and calm and tell a story. So you have to adapt and not be afraid to. I think any dancer who was afraid to change left, because you had to move with it. And then same with Francesco when he took over, and his Italian style was very different to the harder, more American style. It was very flowy and fluid. And that took a big transition again. But again, if you want to keep your job, you move with the time. So it's important for dancers to do that.
Something you brought up earlier on, which I kind of wanting to get to now, is you talk about being on tour. And I feel like a lot of dancers, especially kind of my age and maybe a little bit older, don't really know what is it like to tour with a company. What does that actually entail? So you kind of explain a little bit, like, what does going on tour mean? What is a typical day? What kind of things do you experience? You know, what, just that whole package of that kind of side of the job.
Yeah, that's another really good point. Because touring is a big part of it. I mean, I think we spent 5-6 weeks in Wellington, and then we would spend 5-6 weeks on tour, and you would just keep rotating that. So we never spent more than 5 or 6 weeks at home base before you were on the road again. And that's with one international tour a year. So that was also another thing as well. With touring, you pack your bag for the 6 weeks, and you have a ballet box which the crew take with you on their tour. So things like your point shoes. I mean, I always take point shoes in my hand luggage in case something goes missing. But point shoes and makeup and all those sorts of things are packed separately, and they go with the crew. And you pack your own suitcase with you. But it's important, again, to remember that when you're on tour, when you're either on the bus, when you're at the airport, when you're on the plane, you are representing that company. You're with the whole company there, and you have to act a certain way. You have to remember that you are not there socially, you're there for a job. And so you just have to be aware that people are maybe watching, and that there's going to be a lot of advertising on that, and you have to be appropriately behaved. And when you're on tour, that's when you bond with everyone. So your company becomes a family. It's not like a normal job where you see each other from 9 till 5 and then that's it. You share a room with someone. So we had share a room. We had 2 of us in each room. Some places you get your own room, which was very luxurious. Other times there was one bed in the kitchen and one in the bedroom, and you had to do scissors, paper, rock for that bedroom, or you could pull rank if you were doing a big roll. But you really got to know each other. You know, you bonded with each other. Like, you know, you started the tour all friends and singing on the bus and watching the movies and all that on the bus and gossiping, and then you finish the tour with everyone's heads down, iPhones in, just saying, don't talk to me, don't look at me, you're just over each other. But it was wonderful, and then the next tour we'll all be so excited again. But so you get to your place and it's either by bus or by flight. We would bus a lot in New Zealand because it was close enough that you could. I think some long journeys we did were probably about 8 hours, and then you had to get off the bus and try and find your body for a performance the next day. But you would normally have, if it was a big day, you normally have a travel day, which is separate to a performance day. You would very rarely, unless it was an emergency, travel on a performance day. So you would do a travel day, and then you would maybe do a class depending on how long you've had between classes when you got off. And then that would give the tech crew time to set up the theatre and the stage and everything. And then the next day you would tech in. So most of the theatre would be ready, and you would come in at like 11, and you have to find your way. This is all part of it too. So you're in a new town, you're in a new city. No one's going to guide you. No one's going to tell you where the theatre is or where the supermarket is. I learned that at 18 too. You had to figure out yourself. You had to get there and find those things out early. Don't wait until it's an hour before class and then you go, oh, where's the theatre? Because you'll be late. You have to look at these things early, because sometimes it's on the other side of town. Sometimes it's just across the road. So you would go to the theatre, you would check in, you get yourself set up, do a class, have break, have rehearsal, whatever needed practicing. So-and-so is always injured, so you have to do a changeover, a fit in, change that up. Then you have dinner break, get ready for the show, warm up, curtain up most of the time, so the audience would come in and see you do your warm up, and then you have the show, and then you have always a function afterwards on the opening night, which is the town welcoming you, and you would have drinks and nibblies, meeting sponsors and things after the show. So again, you'd need your nice dress or your nice suit, and you'd have to, again, straight after the show, doesn't matter how tired, etc. you have to put your best foot forward and meet and greet, and so that was all part of it as well. And then you'd pack up after your shows and you'd go on to the next place. But it's important to remember when you're on tour that as tired as you are and as intense it is after the show, you have the function, then you go home and you make dinner after the function, and it's like 2 a.m. and all the rest of it, and then you sew point shoes for the next day, and then you wake up and you do it all again. As tiring as that is for you, you're not the last person to leave that theatre. The tech crew are. So it's so important as dancers to appreciate and respect that to get you on stage, it's not just you and your rehearsal and your performance. It's the costume department that set the costume, that make the costumes, set the costumes up before you get there, clean them and pack them away when you leave. It's the tech crew that arrive 3 days earlier and set up the stage for you at 1 a.m. so you can have class the next day, and then pack up at when we finish at 11, to do the next thing. And they don't finish and go to sleep and have a day off. They finish and then drive to the next place. So I think it's really important as dancers to realize that it does take a village, and that you're not the only one going through all this. You are a family with the tech crew, the musicians, the conductor, the costume department, the ballet staff, and the tech crew. So does that give you a little bit of insight?
It does. It's really interesting. It's always been one of those areas I personally have always been like, huh? But
yeah.
So during your career, what would you say, what were some of your highlights or some of the moments where you're like, yeah, this is why I do it, other than what we already discussed with the community hall, which I thought was an amazing story?
Okay, thank you. This is a question that's always back me again, because as I said, as a young dancer, you think it's going to be the big roles. You think that that's the part that you crave, that once you've done those big roles, you've made it, and you've got those memories, and you've got those things. And there's definitely those moments. There's those moments at the end when you do a lead role and you grab hands with your partner, and you're just drenched in sweat and you're exhausted beyond belief, and you don't walk forward by yourself, you bring the company forward. So you turn to both sides after you've done your own bow, and you initiate, and the whole company is behind you, and they all bow with you. And there's something like that in that feeling that you again acknowledge you're not alone in that moment, that you have the support from your whole family behind you, and having that power and bringing everyone forward at the end and saying, this is us, this is the Royal New Zealand Ballet. They're wonderful moments. But there's one special one for me, when we went to America. So America was my first ever big international tour. And we were doing Ethan Stiefel and Johan Colbert's Giselle. So obviously we're doing Giselle in ABT's theatre with the former principal dancer of the American Ballet as our director, and Johan Colbert's coordinator. So we are terrified, Angus, terrified. I mean, we get to the theatre and we're doing classes the days before, and we were defeated. We said to Ethan, what have you done? Why are we doing Giselle here? We should be doing some contemporary work. We should not be doing a classic like Giselle in ABT's theatre, which is massive, and having them judge us compared to ABT. Like, we're not a big enough company. We have about half the amount of dancers, and this is a classic. Like, they're going to know it. And he said, I would not put you on. These are my sponsors, my family coming to watch. I wouldn't put you out there if I didn't think that you were ready. And so we were all rehearsed I have never known a ballet so well in my life. Every girl knew their head was here on 8 end. Every boy knew what step, to with a centimeter we needed to be. We knew everything. We were drilled. And so I was doing the core that night, and it was opening night, and Gillian Murphy was doing the lead role, who's also an ABT principal. So she was guesting with us and doing Giselle. And it got to Act 2, which females have nowhere to hide. It's the Willie scene. It's all about lines, placement, everything. And we're terrified. And Ethan gave us this huge pep talk beforehand and said, we can do it. We're going to show them what we've got. And I'm proud of you. And we're just, all right, there's so much adrenaline in our bodies. And we hear the music for that iconic thing where you hop, the ladies do their arabesque hops going across. And I remember leading my line on, and I just turned around to the girls behind me, and I was like, come on, we've got this. And everyone was so empowered. And we ran on, and I looked back at them, and we just go, and bum, ba-da-dum. And this, the conductor's just going for it. The music's like coming up through the stage. And I looked around at all the other females on stage, and everyone had these determined eyes, and we were so in it and focused, and we're all just hopping. And it's silent apart from that tune. And all of a sudden, we start hearing applause in this most iconic moment. The audience just starts applauding. And we are just there. It's tears running down our eyes, because it's just this moment of, we did it. Like, this is the most iconic thing in ABT. And we're doing something completely showing us. And we did it. And so the curtain call came up, and we had a standing ovation. And we got a double curtain call, so they had to go back out. And as they're doing double curtain call, every single one of us is just streaming down our faces, because it was just one of those moments where we felt so united and so empowered and so proud, because we were there representing New Zealand, and everyone thought, oh, New Zealand. Like, we even got asked, do they have electricity in New Zealand? Like, they had no idea who we were, what we were about. And there we were, blowing their socks off. And it just, that's a moment I don't think I will forget for the rest of my life. And I think that moment stands out to me more than any other moments. I've had some good ones, but that one is just that feeling of strength and unity and pride. There was just nothing like that. Yeah.
All right, wow. It's one of those things that I've always really enjoyed. One of the elements of ballet I've personally enjoyed is the teamwork element of it. For me, it's that thing of when you finish performance, being like, yeah, we did this. Was that feeling always like a part of the reason you enjoyed the dancing and the ballet? Was it, that feeling you get when you're like, hell yeah, we did this?
I think that was the best and worst part about it, to be honest. And I mean that because in that moment, like I just said about Giselle, and in that moment about performing Christchurch, that they were the moments that made you, they were the moments that made your career and made you feel like you were a part of something special. But then there were other moments, like when I was 19 and doing my first leading role in Cinderella. No, I'd prepared as much as I could physically for that role. And it wasn't until the day I went to perform it, I looked around at my fellow colleagues who I had so much respect for. And I was 19, I just remember thinking, what if I mess it up? I'm not letting myself down if I mess up this lead role. I'm letting everyone down. I'm letting down the company. I'm letting down my fellow colleagues. I'm letting down the director. I'm letting down the choreographer, Christopher Hampson, who's the director of Scottish Ballet. I had this, and it was the day of the show, and I just had this weight where I just went, this isn't about me. This is about them and everyone. And I'm not out there representing me. I'm out there representing this. So I think that weight, no one prepared me for, and no one could prepare you for until you're in that moment. But as I said, that's why at the end, you don't just walk forward by yourself. You bring that company forward with you because they got you there and they got you through it. But I was fortunate enough to have very supporting colleagues. And I remember doing my final solo for Cinderella, and there's 3 menages, very long menage, and you just had it. And I had everyone around the back saying, go Bronte, you can do it. Yes, go girl, you can do this, just finish it, go. So they're like now, and it gets you through. So when you bring them forward, you bring them forward. But it definitely, when you're out front, weighs on you that it's not just about you. So it's the best and the worst part altogether.
So a really interesting thing I found about your career is that when you were training, you also started doing was it teaching? Or were you were heavily involved in teaching at the same time? Was that always a passion you had? Or was that something you kind of got into the company and went, you know what, I want to share this?
Yeah, as well, again, that's another good question. I think I've always been interested in teaching. Even when I was a young student myself at my local school, I would help my ballet teacher out with the primaries and pre-primaries. So I've always enjoyed working with children. I love their imaginations. And I think that helps us as dancers as well, to have a good imagination, have that childlike imagination, that it's not fake, it's real. And I think that I've always connected with children that way. And when I was in company, yeah, there was a lot of opportunities in the first years. They pushed the first years in New Zealand by giving them education tours. So if you weren't doing much, if you're doing a walk-on role, they would have an education tour where the first years would go to schools and do a performance and a Q&A and talk to the kids. So I sort of had that part anyway. And slowly they would ask me, well, actually, would you mind doing this talk? You seem quite confident talking to them. And I said, yeah. Or would you mind doing this Q&A? I was like, okay, sure. Or we're going to do a charity event here. Would you like to be a part of it? So I just sort of kept saying yes to these sort of the more education department side. So I always had that tie. Even when we were on tour, I would do a masterclass in the place we were at while I was performing, so that I might even teach them a section of what I was performing that night, so they get an idea. So I always sort of did that on the road. But as I said, I felt like dance gave me my voice. As you've heard now, I can't stop talking. And I really, I think, have a passion to help others find theirs. So I found my voice through dance. I want others to find theirs, and they're not going to have the same thing to say as me. They're going to have something different to say, and I quite like that.
So you spent, if I remember correctly, you said 6.5 years in the company?
Yeah.
At what point did you decide, I've had enough of this, I want to now go pursue something different? Was it something you kind of just went, you know what, this is the next stage? Or was it, I don't know, what kind of led you to that point?
There was actually quite a lot going on in my life at that time that led me to that decision. It wasn't really one thing. It was quite a lot of things. We'd had our third change of director, and the company was obviously heading in a new direction with that. And then there was talk of a fourth director coming in as well, which I don't know if I was quite ready to start again in that way. And as I said, I'd molded myself 3 different times, and I was sort of getting, I don't know if I want to do that again, you know. And then the other opportunity was, do you go overseas and do that audition, which would mean starting from the beginning again in a new company, because there was no rankings in New Zealand. You couldn't just transition to a new company that, oh, I'm a soloist. They'd be like, well, no, you have no rank, you know, you go to core, which is fine. And I was still young enough to do that. But I thought, after doing all that and getting a taste for that fire and that performance, I didn't want to go back to that and have to prove, I don't know, I just wasn't ready to start at the beginning again. And then on top of that, I met my husband, my now husband, in the company. And he was at the stage where he'd come from England and had a very successful career in Northern Ballet. And when he joined the company in my second last year, so we did 1 year together and 1 year distance, he really showed me that there was other things in my life that I was perhaps missing out on. So I don't think he meant to. He was just, by traveling with him, we would go off and actually go skiing or go and see things. It wasn't just get on the bus, go to the hotel, prepare for the next show, go out. It was, when we were in Europe, it was, let's see the ice, let's go ice skating, let's see this, let's do this. And it made me realize how much I'd sort of missed out on in my personal life. And I don't regret that. As a dancer, you have to sacrifice. It's sort of part of it. But I'd been sacrificing leaving home at 14 to missing out on a lot of family life and a lot of that, to moving overseas at 18 and having that to be my early to mid 20s and being like, oh, I actually in my personal life haven't achieved or seen or been a part of it. I sort of put that all off, and I just was starting to get a bit like I wanted more. And it wasn't until my now husband and I, he stopped dancing and moved back to Australia, and I was on tour and I finished doing Dorothy, so I was doing a leading role, and I got back to the hotel room. It was a really good show, so I was on a high, and I was on a really big high. I was like, wow, that was a great show and great audience, and I was really feeling it. I got back to my hotel room and I sat there alone, and I just thought, oh, this isn't enough anymore. Like, it's not enough. When I was young, it was enough to keep me going, keep me hungry for the next day. But all of a sudden, it just wasn't enough. I wanted more. I wanted more for my life. I wanted more to share. I wanted more to experience. I wanted to travel and see different things, but really see different things, not just travel for company life, travel for personal reasons. And I wanted to have a Sunday where I could hang out with friends and enjoy the sunshine down the beach and not be preparing for my next show. And I didn't want to live out of a suitcase anymore. It was great to travel as much as we did, but as you get older, you get over living out of a suitcase, and you sort of want to set up a home to come back to and be a part of a community and be a part of a family. I'd forgotten what it was like to be a part of a family. So I think all those sort of things, and then watching my now husband back in Australia having all those things, I just turned around to him and said, how would you feel if I joined you? So I moved to Sydney the next year and I started teaching, and the amount I've experienced since then, I haven't regretted a day of it. I learned to drive. I didn't know how to drive because I moved away from home so young, so I learned to drive. I bought a new car. I studied, which as a dyslexic child was just, I would never think of studying. I studied and got my RAD teachers. I met amazing people. I studied nutrition and learned about that to help dancers. We've got our own apartment that I've made a home. I'm more a part of a community. I'm a part of his family and my family more now that I'm back in Australia. And there was things that I had given up as a dancer that now I don't have to. So as much as I would never take back what I had, that moment in time when I had all these things going on, and do I start again? I was sort of had a crossroad. Do I start again and go full for dance, which some people do, or do I choose other things I want in life? And I chose the other things in life, and I'm very grateful for that.
So I thought we're kind of coming towards the end, and the question I ask every person I have near the end is, what has been like a motto or maybe like a rule you've always lived your life by?
Okay. Well, there was something that my mum used to say to me a lot, and that was, no one can ever pull you up very high. You lose grip on the rope, but on your own 2 feet, you can climb mountains. So what that sort of means is that not relying on others to sort of pull you up and to get you where you want to go. It's sort of using your initiative and on your own 2 feet going for it. And I think that that's could not be truer looking back at the career, because I think too often we wait for other people to tell us we're ready, or we wait for other people to tell us we can do something. But I think you're going to be waiting a long time in the dance industry if you're waiting for that. I think you have to back yourself, and I think you have to get in and not wait for the right time or wait for the right opportunity. I think you have to sort of create your own and go for it. So I think that's one I've definitely always stood by. And even now as a teacher, if I think there's something lacking in the industry, the lack of knowledge about nutrition, or lack of knowledge about injury care, rather than waiting for someone else to do it, I'll research it and do it myself.
Well, I gotta say, thank you so much, Bronte, for coming on. I think your story shows a lot of the fact that you have to be adaptable, you have to be intelligent, and you have to work your ass off to have a career. I cannot thank you enough for coming on. No, it's an absolute
pleasure, and they were absolutely wonderful questions.
Well, I'll say everyone else. I'll say, well, to everyone else watching, please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.